Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done their miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wretched children. Man, that is just an incredibly heavy, tragic image to start with, isn't it? A mother dead on her own threshold, leaving behind 3 terrified kids in a completely unforgiving world. This stark, really somber scene is the opening of a story that's going to challenge our very definitions of compassion and utility.
Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here to dive into this with me. Today we are unpacking T.S. Arthur's classic 19th century short story, An Angel in Disguise. We're going to break down its storyline, do a deep dive into character analysis, and explore the social context of the time. We really want to understand how a heartbreaking tragedy completely transforms into this timeless, powerful lesson on empathy.
Section 1. An Era of Social Reform.
Okay, to really get this story, we have to look at the world it was born into. T.S. Arthur lived from 1809 to 1885. This put him smack in the middle of a massive era of social reform in America. You see, back in the mid-1800s, literature wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was an active, potent tool for social change, tackling severe issues like poverty and morality. Arthur himself was actually quite famous for his temperance literature, warning people about the absolute destruction caused by alcohol. So when he opens this story with a mother dying in a drunken fit, a direct, miserable consequence of intemperance, he's not just being dramatic. He is deliberately pulling from the very real, very harsh societal problems of his day to set the stage for everything that follows.
Moving on to Section 2. A Village Lacking Compassion.
Let's look at how this historical backdrop builds right into the story's inciting incident, which is a moment where a whole community's charity gets put to the test. Now, while she was alive, the deceased mother was deeply despised by the village. But you know, death has a funny way of touching our shared humanity. Pity temporarily replaced all that anger. The villagers rushed over to her tumble-down hut. Some brought grave clothes for a decent burial. Others brought some food for the 3 half-starved kids. But here's the critical catch. Their practical compassion was strictly conditional. The urge to help completely vanished the literal second it became personally inconvenient.
It is absolutely fascinating in a really dark way to see how transactional and performative their charity actually was. Let's break down how they decide the fate of these 3 newly orphaned kids. John, the oldest at 12, is sized up as a stout lad who can earn his keep. His value is his labor, so Farmer Jones takes him. Kate is about 10 or 11. She's bright and active, meaning she'll be a useful bound girl in a couple of years. Mrs. Ellis reluctantly agrees to take her. But then there's Maggie. A couple of years prior, a terrible fall injured her spine. She is hopelessly diseased and entirely bedridden. And because she has absolutely zero economic value or utility to offer these people, what's her fate? Complete and utter abandonment.
Just listen to how chillingly cold the community is here. Rather than care for a paralyzed, grieving child, one rough guy suggests just shipping her off to the poorhouse. When someone points out how depressing a place that is for a helpless little girl, another villager actually has the nerve to reply that for this brat, it will prove a blessed change because at least she'll be kept clean. I mean, wow, it's just a brutal rationalization. They're entirely eager to send a terrified little girl to a dreaded institution purely to avoid the hassle of caring for her. Right after the funeral, the neighbors literally turn their backs, walk away, and leave her entirely alone in that empty, miserable hovel.
Section 3. Character Study, Joe Thompson.
This brings us to our first major character arc and the profound contrast within Joe Thompson. By trade, Joe's a wheelwright and a blacksmith. These are jobs that require immense physical strength, grit, and hard labor. So for sure, he's got a very rough exterior. But beneath that tough, working man's surface beats an incredibly tender heart, especially when it comes to kids. He's exactly the kind of guy who will happily fix sleds and wagons for the village boys, completely free of charge.
While literally everyone else is rushing away from the hut, totally eager to wash their hands of the situation, Joe stops at the doorway. He just says, "It's a cruel thing to leave her so." He steps back inside and sees Maggie trying to sit up, this vague terror washing over her thin white face as she begs him not to leave her alone. In just a deeply moving display of humanity, Joe promises she won't be left. Using his massive, strong arms, he wraps this fragile child in clean bedclothes with the gentleness of a woman, and he carries her across the field to his own home. He knows exactly how precious a burden he's carrying.
Section 4. Character Study, Jane Thompson.
But, as any good story goes, a heroic act usually brings some major conflict. Bringing Maggie home introduces an explosive tension into Joe's marriage the absolute second he walks in holding a sick brat. Think about this matchup. On one side, we have Joe, firmly set countenance, resolute eyes, running purely on intuition and deep compassion. Pitted against him is his wife, Jane. She is childless, famously vinegar-tempered, and definitely not the type to sacrifice her own comfort. When Joe walks through that garden gate, her face is literally aflame with anger and astonishment. Usually Joe just gets out of the way when she fires up, but not today.
Facing his furious wife, Joe does something totally masterful. Instead of shouting back or just retreating, he de-escalates. He tells her, "I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children. Now, it is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless little one for a single night." The story notes that the voice of this strong, rough man actually shakes. He even has to turn his head away to hide the tears in his eyes. He asks Jane to just look at Maggie kindly and think of the immense sorrow the child is going through. And this incredible eloquence, this sheer emotional vulnerability from Joe, it slowly but surely starts to crack Jane's rigid defenses.
What follows is a fascinating psychological shift in Mrs. Thompson. Let's walk through it. Step 1 is exactly what you'd expect: initial anger and rejection. Her classic vinegar-tempered reaction to seeing the child. But following Joe's emotional plea, she actually goes into Maggie's room. This triggers Step 2, softening and action. Joe actually peeks through the window later and sees her sitting by the bed, talking gently to the girl. By supper time, Jane's making Maggie a cup of tea and milk-softened toast, watching with real pleasure as the hungry kid eats. Finally, we hit Step 3, complete devotion. See, we learn that Jane's previous bitterness really just stemmed from being a desolate woman. She simply had nothing to love outside of herself. Once she allows herself to care, Maggie becomes honey to her soul.
The biggest catalyst for Jane's transformation is this incredibly quiet, simple moment. Joe checks on Maggie in her room and asks her, "The soft bed feels good?" And Maggie replies with just immense pure gratitude, "Oh yes, sir, so good." The emotional weight of this tiny dialogue is huge. Maggie's sweet patience, despite her physical pain and the loss of her mother, is beautifully disarming. And guess who was hovering in the hallway listening? Jane. She secretly overhears this exchange, and witnessing the child's absolute appreciation for the most basic comforts is what finally cements her transformation. By the very next morning, Jane is the one making up excuses to keep the girl just a day or two longer.
And that brings us to Section 5, the angel in disguise.
So ultimately, Joe never ends up visiting the Guardians of the Poor to get that almshouse permit. Within a week, Jane decides she would rather move into the poorhouse herself than ever send little Maggie there. The Thompson home, which for so long had been dark, cold, and honestly miserable because of Jane's lack of purpose, is suddenly filled with the sunshine of love. This, right here, is the magnificent irony of Arthur's story. A child who was deemed entirely useless by society, a child that practical transactional charity completely threw away, actually provided the ultimate salvation for a broken, desolate home. Maggie was the true blessing. She was an angel who came into their lives, simply disguised as a sick, miserable, and helpless child.
Which leaves us with a final, absolutely crucial question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Think about it. Who are the forgotten Maggies in our society today? Who are the people we overlook or cast aside just because they don't immediately offer us any transactional value or economic utility? And more importantly, what disguised blessings might we uncover in our own lives if we consciously chose to help them? T.S. Arthur's story from the 1800s is a timeless, powerful reminder to look past a person's surface-level usefulness and tap into the profound, restorative power of unconditional empathy. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and I really challenge you to carry that thought with you.